Jesus freak here. This isn't. This has been revised at least once since this edition, but this is the one I got. This is published by Nelson, but produced by Liberty University. Now, there's a few introductions, a section on how to use an introduction on the notes. How to study the Bible. Honestly, you want my opinion, how to study the Bible, you take it, read it. It's just my opinion. And then there's a little... The Winston Bible I had yesterday, it has a better section on this, but it's a little something. Now, this being a Nelson text from that time period, the text is a little bit weird for a King James. I'll probably get into a few of the things. There's an introductory section to the Old Testament and goes on into Genesis. Now, for the most part, it takes the traditional understanding of who wrote this book, that book, but does allow for alternate interpretations, such as for, say, the end of Deuteronomy, Hebrews, etc., that are questionable. Being a Nelson text, it has Nelson's center column system, which has its own notes that are probably more akin to the New King James original notes. Anyway, you got your book introductions with outlines. Section on the Holy Spirit in creation. The Holy Spirit first appearing right in the beginning. Because all three members of the Trinity, all three persons of the Trinity, are active in the process of creation. Anyway, generally these notes are traditional in nature. There's a few I find a little bit questionable. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. Because, some of these are like relying on what we call, a word of Dante. Look it up on TV tropes. It does push dispensationalism. Can't really say I'm surprised. I'm not a dispensationalist. So I have to take that into consideration. Um, there's some in-text maps. I believe these are produced by Macmillan, which is strange. Macmillan used to produce. They used to publish Cambridge Bibles. I have at least one Bible here somewhere, and I think it's my Cameo that mentions Macmillan on the title page. But the maps in the back are typical Nelson of their era. Now, it doesn't seem to take a Ruckmanite approach because they're open to certain types of variations, like you see here in Psalm 8 with the little lower than the angels versus little lower than God thing. I could probably explain that. Doesn't get into the whole Psalm 12 Ruckmanite interpretation. Most of the book titles for being King James are wrong, but I'm likely to blame Thomas Nelson for that rather than Liberty. It does push what I call the Word of Dante interpretation of Isaiah 14, which, I don't. I know most people do go with that approach. I don't. It does reference the Schofield note on Meshach and Tubal, although it says, that's grasping straws. The Holman Study Bible does the same thing. It does suggest matters of textual criticism which may be inappropriate, although it doesn't necessarily accept them. So, you gotta kind of take that as you may. Now, there's an intertestamental section covering the intertestamental period. And it follows up with a harmony of the Gospels. Usually this kind of thing comes in the back, but here it's stuck in right before the New Testament. You get right into the New Testament. There's an intro, and then it goes on with the Gospels. It seems to be pushing Matthean primacy, which is the traditional understanding as opposed to the more common among scholars, Markan primacy. Although it does bring up the concept of Markan primacy, which is the idea that Mark came before Matthew, and that Matthew and Luke were based on Mark with additional sources. It's a red letter text, and it's a decent red letter. It's not the neon pink of an Oxford or a World, but it's a decent red. It has the NASB style of citations into the Old Testament from the New are in small caps. You can see that here. Now, I'm going to mention this, that for some reason this Nelson edition has what I call the Zondervan error. Although I've seen it in others. I've seen it in a Collins once. You see betrayeth here in Matthew 26:73. Be berayeth. I believe that betray kind of assumed the meanings of bewray by mistake. But, this kind of thing happens. Languages various verses will have, they'll have various marks on the side. Let's see if it comes through. Ooh, it's this one in the gutter just below the section heading. But it matches with the symbol on this part. There's some character reference sections. Now let's get into the back. Teachings and illustrations of Christ is a table. Basically an index because it's alphabetical. Parables, miracles. Mostly this synoptic. Prophecies of the Messiah fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Well, Messiah is a Hebrew and Aramaic term, and Christ is a Greek and Latin one. But the word means the same thing. There's several pages of these. And then there's a table of weights and measures and currencies, which compares to about what was current around 1988 when this edition came out. Prayers of the Bible and index to annotations. If you're looking for a note on a certain topic, it's by verse and page. and that's followed by a concordance, which doesn't seem to be quite as comprehensive as your Cambridge or Oxford, but at 128 pages, it's still pretty bulky. Now, this map is a problem. First of all, because they seem to go out of the way to avoid having any sort of crossing of any major body of water, let alone the Red Sea proper. The second problem is they're putting Mount Sinai here. Paul says Sinai is in Arabia, not on the Sinai Peninsula. So the alternative positioning of Sinai somewhere around here, like on the eastern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, is better. And that's where I believe Sinai is. Can't fault Liberty for that one. That's Nelson's fault. Honestly, it's not too bad, but I think Holman did better, honestly. Holman's is a little more neutral, where this has a bit more of a dispensationalist, little more focused on the rapture concept than I'd like. As for the structure, this doesn't appear to be a stitched binding. I think it's perfect bound. Basically, this is a glorified cheap paperback. I believe, Nelson's gotten better in recent days, but around the time they did this, well, it wasn't that long ago. It was about 20 years ago. This was printed in, I believe, 2000. And surprisingly, it's an American printing. But for a long time, Nelson Bibles were el-cheapo, junk. And now they're actually starting to get serious again. They've even kind of improved. They've improved on the King James text they're using, too. And, I got el-cheapo Nelson here. And this is new enough to be in their modern font. And while it's still got some of the issues you'll find in that text, like the weird names it uses for the books that are different from what an actual proper King James, like from Cambridge, Oxford, or even Holman's going to use. They fixed in these newer ones. They fixed the more serious flaws in text. Like here, you see, it doesn't have betray, which is an error in printing, and they're more cautious now. I'm thinking at one point that the actual, a lot of people who prefer the King James got really irate with Nelson/Zondervan and pretty much forced them to go over the text. I can't be sure of that. But anyway, the text in here is a bit unusual as far as King James texts go. And more recent King James texts deal with that. But yeah, it's okay. I probably wouldn't recommend it so much because of its slant, but if that's a slant you're into, I come from a completely different tradition within Protestant Christianity than a lot of the people who watch my videos. So, Jesus freak out.